So I was looking at ways of really kind of embodying this idea of uh, putting AI, putting the product into the conversation. And the trouble is, what I was finding was that the token costs can get crazy expensive really fast.
Mhm.
And so, what was always interesting for me was the subscriptions are massively subsidized. So you can get a lot more effort with subscription. But what tends to happen is that when you build a service that includes AI, you end up um, selling APIs because no one is allowed to bundle the subscription with their product. You have to buy the APIs for your product. So if like a Lovable, for example, for them to implement AI in their product to do the design work of building an application, they're effectively reselling tokens. Now they might be using internal models, they might be using OpenAI, they might be using Claude, but effectively there is a cost to them to do the AI work. And now, there's ways of mitigating that, obviously, but you do big deals when you buy a lot, but it's still a cost, and it's a heavy cost, and it's completely variable with the amount of work it does. One of the beauties has always been with the sort of the SaaS businesses is that the incremental cost is very small for every extra user. The actual processing power is not too bad, but with LLM work, it really switches back and it becomes a heavy variable cost. The more AI work you do, the significantly more the cost is. So it doesn't scale as nicely. And I was thinking about how we could make that better, or how you could really leverage either the subscription or other ways of getting LLM work done. And so, I mean, it's a fairly standard pattern that I'm actually doing, but I'm doing it in a slightly different way. So the pattern itself, and let me just bring up the documentation of it so I can talk it through. The pattern itself is effectively this idea that you create a workflow that so you have a workflow that the LLM works through, but instead of doing, I'm wrapping this in MCP. You could probably do this other ways, but I'm doing this in MCP so I could offer this as a service. You have a workflow, but instead of the LLM work happening on the MCP side, the MCP requests the client to do the LLM work and it hands it back to the MCP to implement. And that adds a few advantages. What you tend to do is you can validate what the LLM's bringing back. So if you're coding, for example, you can make sure it contains all the things that need to happen. But there's a lot of other things that fall out from this, such as maintaining state. So you could, for example, you could use one LLM for one stage of the workflow and then switch to a different one, or even a local model, without really losing anything, which really helps in terms of managing the flow. But let me bring up the diagram so it makes it a bit more obvious what I'm doing here. So let's use Lovable as an example. I mean, in Lovable, they've built AI into their product. The user talks to their product. The inference happens inside their product. They will be buying, or they will be paying for the inference themselves. Probably I'm sure they'll put a margin on top, so the user has to pay extra, and they do all the orchestration within the product, and they get the output out. But obviously, the more inference you use, the bigger the cost gets. With what we're trying to do is the user talks via its LLM client, such as Claude Code or Cursor, and then they manage. So they've got their own inference budget here, and possibly using a subscription so they can get leverage of that cost. And then what happens is by using an MCP server, which manages the state of what the process is, it can it can do some of the the process, and then request the LLM work back to the client where the inference budget is run to the client, and then say that the next step is to then move the workflow on. So you kind of go through this loop going between the client and the MCP server to get to what the output is. So in here, we can completely move all of the inference out of the MCP and hand it to the client to do, and still end up with a really powerful output without having to spend any inference budget at all on the MCP side. And this really starts to create a bunch of interesting things. The costs on the MCP side are much smaller. You don't have to worry about the LLM budget at all. You can you can switch providers if Cursor becomes really good, or say if OpenAI or Claude becomes really good or changes its pricing, you can easily switch. You haven't lost anything because the state is maintained within inside the MCP, or even you could use local stuff for simple things if you need to. You can make sure that whatever's being output is valid because you've got validators at every input back into your state store in the MCP side, and you can really get a huge benefit over what a lot of the standard way of doing things. Effectively, I mean, actually, one of the Claude got a nice line on this. Effectively, what we're trying to do here is move the inference to being, or the LLM provider to be more of the CPU, and the MCP is the operating system which does the workflow on top of it. So it moves the sort of the power argument a little bit. There are some challenges to this. Obviously, depending on the model, the output is variable, and you really need to make sure your validation is good. And you need to also make sure that the next step process is working, so the workflow is moving through the process. But it actually, I think it's a super interesting approach because it can be applied to lots of different areas. Right now we're using this for Bravo MCP, which is, there's this ability to sort of generate code from design. And we can use this to LLM to generate that design work and validate as it comes in. But it can actually be applied to a number of different areas where we have this idea of the sort of creation piece happens on the client. It has to go through a validator to make sure it's solid, and then go through a workflow step. So I think this has a number of applications to help people really manage their LLM for inference costs, while still getting significantly good output. What do you guys think?
This is very cool, and I think it's a good insight. It's an excellent insight about like how the economics work, and allowing the client to say, "Hey, you're paying for the tokens. You use as big or small or whatever you want, and we'll work with that." Yeah, I think it has a built-in assumption that the model doesn't matter or it matters less. Because otherwise you're at risk for significant variability in your output based on what model the client brings to bear. Right. And the trick is if someone uses like local models, then it's only as good as those local models are. And while that has a certain fairness to it, there's a neat there's a question of brand risk, right? When you provide a harness and they bring whatever brain they're going to bring to it, do they, for the result, do they credit slash blame the harness? Do they credit slash blame the brain, right? The actual LLM. And that I think is a risk that like Lovable doesn't take because they're combining those two things, right? They're saying, hey, this is the brain we use, and therefore it's up to be controlling their costs, but also be generating more benefit. And the results they get are like the thing that they have to stand behind, right? And it's like if you don't get good results out of Lovable, you say, well, Lovable didn't work, and I move on, and that basically becomes their service contract, right? And kind of what you're doing here is you're disaggregating these things, and you're saying, well, the brain's up to you, but this is really a harness, right? And really gets into debates about harness engineering, like there's a lot of discourse around this around Pi and open code, both of which have been part of fights of why are we losing access to the preferred pricing in Claude, right? That's something that happened over the course of the last several
Yeah.
months. And right now OpenAI is bragging about how you can use codex models with those using your subscription. We'll see how long that lasts. It's going to be a question of supply constraint, but I think that those are all hard questions are not yet answered, right? And so Lovable right now has significant model risk as a result of them taking that on, and you're sort of talking about like, okay, how do you not take on model risk? And that's what I think is so interesting about this, right? It's a theory of the case that says that essentially is saying what's the bet on this? The bet on this is that in the medium term, the model starts to matter less, right? They bring whatever model they're going to bring to it, and they're able to get more value from it because we believe that the model provides less differentiation and the harness provides more differentiation, and you get to remove your model cost and risk And we don't think that the upside of having control over the model is all that high. And then that becomes a thesis, right, for how the business is going forward. And certainly I've been reading a lot of people who believe that, like people who talk about that for like OpenAI Codex, like, hey, Codex is better than Claude Code. But is it about the model or is it about the harness?
Yeah.
This is I think the open question that's out there. And what I like about this is it says, well, if you assume one of those two answers, which is that's the harness more in the model, this structure makes a lot more sense. And it points to how somebody who has domain expertise like you do, right, in the area of new product development and UX design, et cetera, can bring that expertise to bear with whoever that winning model is, right? Because you're saying, well, that part doesn't matter nearly as much, or at least that's not. I believe that you could come in with like a few different models and still get value out of this because where I think but you won't get value unless you're bringing my domain expertise as manifested in this. I think that becomes the nature of the bet. I think it's a very cool bet because you're obviously not a frontier lab, but you are obviously an expert in new product development and design, and that allows you to be putting your best foot forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think you made some really good points there. I mean, to my mind, I mean, yes, opening up to lots of models does create some risk in terms of the output. And I think that's one of the things we need to make it really clear to people is that, it's going to be a bit garbage in, garbage out to a degree. But, if you look at how the models work, I mean, even today, most of the sort of dynamic workflows and the ways I think that the models work is they try and do the heavy model to do the orchestrating and kind of the design work, and then they hand over some of the simpler tasks to the Opus hands over to Sonnet to do stuff that's pretty simple, and then maybe even Haiku if it's just doing some sort of text manipulation, right? So they themselves kind of up and down scale the models depending on what they're trying to do, and I think to a degree. I mean, I do believe in that the models that ultimately will become more and more of a commodity. I think there's going to be specialty models, and probably there was always going to be frontier models, which will be, the best. But you don't, for a lot of things, you won't need to have them. And I think, obviously, coding has probably led the way in terms of where most people put their functionality in. So, it's a lot of the sort of free models are actually reasonably good at coding. So, I think it will be interesting to play around with different models at different paces and let people try out to see what works best for them. Really, the goal here is to kind of give people the freedom to choose and give them what makes the most sense. If you've got a great subscription, use that. If you want to try on something cheap, sure, you're going to have a bunch more iterations, it will fail. But, the idea is that the validations will be good enough to catch most of the issues. So it won't do stupid things. It may not have the best, it may not be the best the first time around, but, you should get there at some point. And, you might want to do a spin through with the big models first and leave some tasks to some of the workflow steps to cheaper models, so you can play around with it. But the great thing is it gives you that complete control. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, the thing that made me was super interesting was I think it was yesterday Jensen from NVIDIA brought out his new PC AI PC with God knows how many cores in it. Running pretty hardcore games on a pretty low power laptop because of what it can do. And I think we're going to see a lot of, and also we're going to see a bunch of people, in the longer term. I see people wanting to do local inference for privacy reasons or for cost reasons. And the great thing about this approach is it can handle all of those. If you want to do it completely local, you can. If you're with your own hardware, so you're doing specific tasks, you don't want to go to a model out there, you can. If you want to then switch to model, you can. You get the
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
And it kind of sort of de-risks what the future might bring a little bit.
Yep.
Because as I say, I think the value is in the harness. And I think what's interesting, particularly for me, is that that's a lot of where Anthropic's won over the last sort of 6 months. Is because it's really put the effort into some of the harnesses it's built, and it's made it so that co-work, code, design, all these things have really unlocked a bunch of value for people. And I think that we're going to see more of that sort of focus to really unlock this stuff.
I think it will be really interesting
What
to
about
see
you,
how these
JC?
platforms. Yeah, I think it will be really interesting to see how these platforms evolve because I think if I try to look back, what we see with the Lovables and base 44s, V0s, it seems to me like they were, of course, trying to leverage the latest models, but they were filling in the gaps, right? So they were using their magic wand to basically make a beautiful website, make a beautiful app, etc. And as the models got better, uh, it's almost the other way around. Like you start seeing more people just using their own Claude Code or Codex or whatever it is to actually produce stuff that might even be better with way less iterations or way less prompts. So it's like they 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 probably can become limited. Like the lovables and all these tools, they can become limited for just that very reason of trying to fill in the gaps of the models when they start to get better. So maybe one approach or one solution for them is to become headless, so everyone can attach them to wherever they're working and however they're working. Now, the one reason or challenge that I do see with it, which I think you mentioned, Toby, is they the fact that you have full control is great for most experienced builders or developers, but then for most of the regular folks, like the ones using Lovable or whatever other similar tool, they do want um some guardrails, like some hard guardrails, right? Like and Lovable wants to be very strict and opinionated about what they build and how they build it and how the final product looks, because they cannot uh people cannot be shipping like crappy websites or apps. So I think that becomes more of a challenge. Yeah, I agree that that can become a challenge. So it'll be interesting to see how they can adapt to that. Um, and then the other thing on the positive side, because I do really believe that this might be, yeah, probably how most builders wanna build their stuff using their local, let's say, machine and AI, their Claude Code or Codex to build their apps. I think another benefit of this is that they are not sharing all the information, all the data with these external tools, right? Like they have everything. Well, it's yet to be seen, but they probably will have everything uh, under their control, and they will only share whatever they share with Claude or Codex or maybe this won't be true every time, but I think that could be another, let's say, um, another selling point for this headless AI, because basically if I talk to Lovable and I want to build an app, I will be sharing a lot of data, a lot of maybe sensitive information that I don't necessarily want that tool to have. So maybe that's another concern. Um, and then I think in general, as the models get better, tools like Lovable again, and we are just using Lovable as an example because it's the easiest one to pick, um, but I think they might have a hard time adapting to the ever growing needs of developers, right? Like they are. I think you also made that point in your presentation somewhere in the slides, where the best builders they don't get celebrated. They basically are a problem for the lovables of the world, because they are pushing the limits of the platform, and then they will have to wait for a cooldown, or they will have to hit a higher paywall, or whatever the strategy is. So I I think for those very power specific power users, the lovables and the V zeros of the world, they can become a bit kind of limited. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting read on what is happening, and a very interesting experiment how things could evolve in this builder kind of ecosystem. I really like it, and I think Bravo Studio as an MCP is the perfect example of how to apply and repurpose um, all that harness into something that actually works where people are working at, right?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Well, the proof of the pudding is whether or not people can actually use it. So it's all very well making things, but we need to actually get it launched fully so people can try it out and see how they get on. I think what really struck me as I was building this was that lots of really fun things came out from doing this, probably more from the MCP side. But when you have like the context in complete, when the product is completely within the conversation, loads of things fall out really easily. I mean, for example, one of the problems people have, particularly with complex applications, is, where is that option I need on what menu to make that thing happen? Right. And you've got a thing, on the iPhone now, you have searches through the settings because there's so many settings trying to figure out what you need to do and where it is. And the thing is, if your tool is if your product is in the conversation's already there to help you guide you to whatever tool you need to do, whatever task you need to do. So instead of you having to kind of figure out where it is, you just ask and it's there. And you don't need to build a help center to tell people where it is to unlock that option. It's just part of what they're doing because that's how this works. And the other thing which I was, again, lots of interesting things come out from this. One of my other thing that was really helpful for me was that I now have it in the workflow. If the workflow fails for whatever reason, there's a tool that the LLM can call to store the context and the feedback of what the issue was, which can then be automatically then fixed as soon as the issue gets dropped to know what the problem is so it can fix itself. Because it has all the context of what's going on. It's able to submit all that context to an issue log, which can then just be worked through in the evenings to fix problems as they come up, or where the process gets stuck. So it kind of, all this stuff kind of supports itself in being, that conversation, the model glue around the product helps just unblock a bunch of things which would have taken a lot of work to build independently. It just kind of falls out because of the way it works. It works when you build something like this. So yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting lessons from going through this exercise that I think a lot of companies could benefit from by really putting their product into the conversation. I'm going to keep saying that until people start doing it.
I have a question. What do you guys think? I want to hear what you guys think about this, but so it probably the cost that these companies, the Lovables of the world, they need to sustain is it's higher than the token cost. So I think that gives them that margin to play with, in which they can charge a subscription or they can charge like an add-on or whatever it is. So I think that gives them the margin to bump their benefits, right? So if they were to bring that to this headless approach by which they work within Claude or as an MCP server, let's say, do you think that would maybe uh, make it more difficult for them to justify costs or sorry, benefits? What could be the ways that they could still be profiting from people using the tools?
So I'll give my thoughts first. I mean, I think we need to separate two things here. There's kind of like this headless MCP approach, and then there's this client side inference thing, right? Which are two separate things. I'm combining them, but they're two separate things. So the headless approach really doesn't change the product very much. I mean, I think Lovable has just introduced MCP in preview, which gives you access to some of the product, but it's pretty much like being inside Lovable. It's, give me a screenshot. What's the code here? Can you create chain, make this change? Really in a similar way to the chat is inside Lovable. It's just inside the LLM. So that benefits from the LLM ecosystem of other MCPs being able to apply to it, but it's not really changing the core product. There are lots of pieces of Lovable you can't touch from the MCP. It doesn't unlock the entire platform. It's some of the pieces they've enabled. And that's the sort of pattern that most people are building with this. It's where do most people spend their time? Let's unlock that bit. But then when they want to go and do billing or they want to go do whatever, then they go back into the platform and do that. And again, it would be a massive change for them to move away from how they're currently doing inference, which is on their server side, and to invert it to doing like what this approach is. So I can see them adding a sort of a headless Lovable, which they've kind of done already for some of their functionality, but Lovable and nearly all the other sort of SaaS products who are touching the MCP are using this approach. It's MCP as an interface to their existing massive SaaS product. And that unlocks some of the functionality, but all the inference is still done on their side. So they're either subsidizing it or putting a margin on top to just and a lot of their justification for the product's cost is because that's where the inference is done. And you take the inference off that, and then you can kind of lose a little bit of what their product's about. So it would be I think they can. So short answer to your question is, I think it's easy for them to do, or easy-ish to do, the sort of headless part of their product, or at least some of it. But to do the inference on the client side would be extremely hard because it's massively changing how the whole product works. What do you think, Ray?
I think what you're getting at is I think involves a couple different things, right? So one is the idea, what are you really selling? And one of the best pieces of advice I got getting into the software business was from a then retiring venture capitalist who told me that software is solidified consulting and consulting is liquefied software. They're just two different, right? And I think what we're getting into here is like potentially a different state of that as well, right? You're selling your expertise. So like, you and Toby are, experts on user experience. Toby has been around NPD forever, and like he really knows his way around it. And how can you bring that expertise to the benefit of your organization? And previously we might have done that through a SaaS, right? And a SaaS is where, like Bravo Studio, right, was selling a way, right? This is a way that you can, bring, app development into your organization. And it was a series of steps that you take, right? And you enable that set of steps. You enable that way by providing them with the tool, but really what you're selling is the way more than what you're selling is the tool. If you were doing this as professional services, you'd be doing this as a training course or something, right? Similarly, you're selling away, it's just being manifested as services as opposed to being manifested as software. It's worth noting that's the reason why we talk about software as a service. Partially, it's because of that the fluidity between these states, as well as just the idea of being a rental model. And I think that when we look at it that way, it sort of opens us up, right, to how this thing is really providing value, right? Because we have the robot that is now the client. So instead of you being the user of the software, right, or you being the recipient of the professional services, the LLM is, right? That is doing the work for you in order to get the work done. And what you're doing is you're providing them with something that they can actually consume. And I think that's what's genuinely new about this model that I think is super cool. And I think it is not nearly as well understood. But the whole idea of building for AI as opposed to just building for people something that contains AI is a little bit like the shift we've been going from being very cursor oriented, if you will, right? Having the IDE, it's like one step away from like what Visual Studio Code was to, Codex or Claude Code or what have you. Something that's much more centric, right, on the new way of doing things. And I think that's harder in the initial stages for people to conceive of because they're like, wait, that's not the way we've been doing business, but it's clearly the way things are going. Right. I read the thing of like, Cursor's initial pushback from investors was, this is insane. How are you going to displace VS Code? And the new pushback from Cursor is this wasn't ambitious enough, right? Because all you're talking about is displacing code, but like there's this whole new thing going forward. And what you're seeing, Toby, is like what that new model looks like that you can actually be delivering this new state of matter, new state of expertise you can bring to bear. And I think that's one aspect. A second aspect I think you're also getting at, JC, is the idea of, and this is something we've talked about before, right? Selling components, right, versus platforms. And like if you sell the platform, it's like the way it becomes a central thing that you need to use. And the attractiveness of Lovable is a one-stop shop. And that's a very attractive, simple sale. But what AI allows for is being able to bring in these bare components, which means you can just be selling the part where you're expert without having to sell the part where you're not expert. This gets like, that's why you don't want to be bundling in the tokens, because that's what someone else does really well, is make the AI, right? What we do really well is bring sort of the structure, right? To have that, to be able to make better apps. And that's, and being able to do that, componentized version, that integration first version well, is a challenge, right? It's a technical challenge too. It's one of the reasons why there's going to be moats for people who can do this stuff well. That I think
Mhm.
is, so gets into being a big part of why this, unlocks more value, because it's not like just any goobers can be able to come in and do this. People will come in, they'll make a mess of it, but being able to integrate with this, that's a skill. And it's a skill that, because you are early to this, you're climbing the experience curve that will allow you to be getting, more durable competitive advantage on it, going forward. And that other companies who, like you say, who encourage to go down this road, will also see those kinds of benefits. Which also is like why not only is it about what this unlocks, which is like the slide that you're on, but I think there's also a, what do you need in order for this to do? Like, what are, best practices or qualities that your product needs to have in order for this to be successful?
Mhm.
Which I think you can sort of look back on some things you've been working on that you found to be hard. Like, frankly, error states become a really big deal, right? Because this allows AI to be able to try again. Because one-shotting is a lie. I think we all know that. It tries something, oh wait, that didn't work. But if it gets good feedback, then it can try it again. Being able to have, also feedback of what to do next, being able to carry it from, step to step to step.
Yeah.
Basically, how can you bring more Toby and more expertise into the AI's brain over the course of multiple turns to improve the connection between that brain and delivering the output that the eventual client's looking for? That's my long answer to your short question.
You gave me a really good idea there, actually. I think one way I might describe this is, talking about sort of moving on from development and kind of moving up to effectively, I guess, services. This would be an integrated service environment, rather than an integrated development environment. I mean, effectively, what we're trying to sell here is a service rather than the sort of nuts and bolts of things. But anyway, I
Mhm.
mean, I think. Well, let's see. I think the next step really is to try and evangelize this and see if we can get some traction on it. I think this it has a bunch of interesting applications, and I think one of the exercises we have to do now is to see if we can get some traction.
Yeah. This is the future of software. I mean, the what you're describing here is like, we're still figuring out what these patterns look like, but it used to be that what software was, we had things we were just doing as humans, or sort of direct human communication, and then we had software that were communicating directly down to like the CISC chip, right? And like was all very, had everything had to be a very deterministic flow, right? And now this is a different flow, because not only, I mean, like like in your previous slide where you sort of show the next step and the generated whatever, the fact that loop of relationship that it has, that is much more like the loop that a human being goes through working with a piece of software, except now it's the machine going through that loop, which is super exciting and super different. And the companies that are able to get this right are going to be the ones that are, very, very successful in the, months, the next couple of years.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. Very cool. So, is there anything else you want to cover off today? I mean, we could talk a little bit about the idea that you put forward, Ray, about the thumbnails. Should we touch on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this kind of gets the idea of, well, the like this, right? Sort of, componentizing it, where we've been doing these these videos, and like, how can we, help elevate, help people see what's going on with them, through being able to surface them better on YouTube. That's the thumbnail part, and just how to automate that process more, right? So it's not just a, hey, if we're doing this, it just creates more work for somebody. Right now, we're using Descript. We're using Descript rooms to create these videos, and they've been which we shifted off of. Previously, we were using Squadcast, and I think people who look at our early episodes versus the more recent ones will see a definite shift in quality. And part of that's the tool, and part of that's the significant work of JC here, who's doing more of the editing. So credit where credit is due. But then how can we get even more without putting more onto JC's back is kind of what I'm thinking about. Like, can we get a pipeline where it's like, let's take the video and let's turn it into a thumbnail, right? That is thematic, and that we can that's helping people make better decisions, right, about which of these episodes they want to listen to. And I don't know about you all, but I've been using like the newer generation of image gen models, right? Like Nano Banana Pro out of Google, the ChatGPT Model 2, which recently came out, and the it was called Image 2, I think, and or even Microsoft just came out with a new image generation model, and I think there's a neat opportunity to say, hey, well, let's take the video and can we just go from video to thumbnail, right?
So
That might.
that's a great. That's a,
Yeah,
sorry, go
no, that was it.
ahead. I mean, so what do you think would be the sort of prompt to be looking at here? Just effectively to give it like a summary of the video, and then asking for an infographic to describe it, or would you try and what would you try and encompass in the thumbnail to be able to help people kind of see what the value is for them?
I think that's something we can experiment with, but the really shocking thing here is that and this also just sort of gets into like how we work with AI in 2026. That's different from how we would have worked with it, when Lovable was first coming out in like 2023. Um, we could feed it the entire transcript of this.
It's
We
that's the
could
crazy
we
part, right?
we could feed it that. We can feed it images. We can also attach images to the same request, right? Of this is Toby,
Yeah, yeah.
this is Ray, this is JC, and have it make, I don't know, turn us into pirates or something. I mean, the what, and then being able to take like the contents of the meeting, right? Plus, us, and being able to, and even just telling it, hey, we're just trying to we want to make an attractive thumbnail, right? And let it take a run at that. And then the really shocking thing is you have it take a run and make 3 of them, and then you use again AI to judge which one is good.
Yeah.
It is
This is
really what we can do both in terms of, a generation side as well as the review side. And even we can then take that, hey, here are 3 that came through. Let's take the best of the ideas and make it into a 4th one. That's also something that these models can do, not by, making lots of weird steps, but just by, composing the prompt. It's just a matter of iterating over the videos to get it done.
Yeah. And I
yeah.
mean, they're gonna do a really, I mean, a better job than us trying to figure out like what's the, also if we look at the conversion side, like if you want to do a thumbnail that really converts, like, you have to show the the speakers avatars in a certain way, or maybe in a front row and then the rest on the background. Like there are many different strategies that we are not gonna get to learn or be able to implement. So it's like, okay, hey, uh given this transcript, given these visuals, like just go figure it out. Like what's the best way, the best combination of elements to make the best thumbnail? And yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think
And
we could do it. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
to sort of allow the AI some degree of creativity, right? We're not just having
Yeah,
it look create slop. Like, could say these are topics, we're talking about real ideas. Help
Yeah.
the person trying to figure out how they're coming in to get some of those ideas. In fact, we can probably do the same thing with the description in terms of giving better, summarization of the key things we're talking about here. And then that's kind of the beginning, right? Of like being able to take the fact that we're talking about substantive stuff and being able to elevate that to people through the thumbnail And then you can take it up a level, right? Like you were talking about infographics a second ago, Toby. I don't know whether infographics are the best way to do a thumbnail, but they can be a great way to convey some of the so what's out of these conversations that then go on socials, right? That we can then
Yeah,
share those ideas with people, which gets both distribution from what we're talking about here, but also makes people smarter. It's not the same direct that they're, sliding through of like, of the various forms of maxing or what have you, It's like, I know I sound really old when I say that, but but there's what we're doing here is, I think, really creating a lot of value, and I think there are multiple ways that we can bring that value into the market and, help people who are trying to make better decisions while simultaneously improving your brand reputation, for very low marginal cost, because we're already doing the good work.
Yeah.
that's very true. Should try it
All
out
right, sounds
for
fun.
sure.
We should try and we should see. We should all try and come up with some ideas, and then see which one we think's the best. We each
Yep.
come up with some ways of processing the thumbnails, and have a little competition to see I mean, hopefully we use all of them, but it'll be interesting to see what different approaches we come up with. I mean, it's a really interesting idea. I think this idea of just trying to, I mean, as you say, everything, so much of this can be done with AI now, um, and making it and taking more and more of the process means you can do so much more. So we should try it
Yep.
out.
Super cool.
Definitely. That one last thought on that, like as everyone today's world, we just do everything with AI, right? Like every single step in any process, like you try to make it through AI to help you through it. I think one thing that I've found is that it also kills, and coming from a more of a design background, it kills some of the creativity as well. So yeah, maybe this is like just me thinking out loud how it's going to change people's approach to creating
I
things
would.
like designs and
I challenge that a little bit. Oh, well, I mean, only in the respect of it's hard to unpick that from what did people say when the computer design first came out or Photoshop first came out, and like this isn't really people aren't really artists anymore because they're not using the tool, right? I think
mm,
you've got to every time we make technology that improves thing, then it means we can do more. We can do things we could not have done made possible before, or it actually opens it up so that people who have the ideas but not necessarily the skill can start being involved in the conversation too. So I mean, yes, it takes some things away, but it also widens the sort of field for other people to get involved as well. And I'm not saying it's good or
that's right.
bad. It's different. I mean, you will probably lose some skills in some areas, but it opens up so many more possibilities in others that it's
Yeah.
hard to judge whether or not until we get until we look back in hindsight whether it's been a good or a bad thing.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying it's a good or well, I'm saying there's not in a like uh artists are gonna lose their jobs or something that catastrophic or but it's more like at a human level, like I can feel myself like thinking in less creative ways as I kind of hand over my creative thinking sometimes to the AI, right? So, but I agree. Like, that was something that only a small portion of people could do or professionals could do, and now it's like same as coding. Like everyone can create something today. Uh, so any idea you're able to actually convey it and to make an artifact out of it. So that's insanely positive for society in general. But yeah, I mean, it was like thinking out loud reflection.
No, that's
I,
good. It's a good point.
I think that, like, you could say that the art of that Gutenberg killed the art of illumination, right? So it used to be
Yeah.
that, like, were being replicated. There were these wonderful. I mean, if you've seen like these really old books, right? They have these wonderful illustrations that were being made by these monks who were, hand copying the books. But as a result, there were dozens of copies of a given book, right? And they're much more at risk of getting lost. A lot of literature from that period is gone as a result.
Yeah.
Gutenberg comes along, he takes that away by creating a printing press, right? People said that Charles Dickens, demeaned the art of writing, through his serialized stories that would eventually become what we call the novel, named because it was a new form of writing, was novel. The camera, the photography when it came out about 150 years ago was also, oh, this is going to be the end of art because painting is actually a really important art. It wasn't quite the end of painting. There's more painting there ever was, but economically it's not nearly as important, right? But it did mean that a lot more people could create with, but could create and compose with photography. And we would hardly, from our current position, say that photography is an art. My experience with AI is that there's some people who use it, and I've heard the expression before, don't make me think. And that's, I think, a very dangerous way for people to go. But I think that's dangerous for them to go for any profession, right? Because if they're not using their brains, as the brains are really what differentiate us from the rest of the animals, that's a dangerous place to be. But I would posit that, like, it's not so much that you're being less creative, it's that, rather than, you getting to be creative and then you get to work on the thing for a while and then it's gonna be hours before you sort of have to hit that high point again. All right, you had an idea. That's fantastic. A minute later, here you go. What's next?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
I
right.
find I'm thinking more than ever, and actually I have to think more creatively than ever because all that mechanical stuff, it does. And the better I've gotten at prompting the AI and setting up skills for this, the more it sort of can do the more mechanical problem solving, right? What it needs from me is almost exclusively the out of the box ideas
Yeah,
because it can handle the rest, or it's getting better at handling the rest, right? I wouldn't have said this, 6 or 12 months ago. I mean, we were working on the previous thing. You and I were working on Toby. That was not that wasn't, I wouldn't have said the AI was nearly as capable as it is in June of 2026. And I
Yeah.
bet it would
It's crazy.
conversation be even more capable. But the out of the box thinking, that's where that is the creative aspect where I think we provide a lot of value. And it just means that the way we express creativity and the pace at which we have to bring it to bear really increases. And also means we don't need nearly as much labor in order to have that come about. And I think that's always disturbing when our workflows change, but the opportunity for us to really create outsized value, if we are, as David Trott says, using our loaf, um, I think goes way up. And that's why I am particularly excited about it. And I certainly know that you two gentlemen have fantastic loaves, and that just this is going to be more of a focus for it, even as we're
Mhm.
learning how, right, to apply our loaves properly and plug it into the machine, which is a big part of like the what you're talking about in terms of using the headless AI, right? How do you convey that expertise so that you can get that maximum leverage?
No
very
problem.
true.
Nice.
That's very true. Maybe it might be just a perception thing. Like as you change your scratchpad, and again, coming from design world, like you change your scratchpad to an input field to prompt things to happen. I think that can have an effect on certain people. But I do agree. Like it just really exciting how it changes and unlocks the possibilities to yeah to create and execute on any out of the box idea.
Mhm.
It's insane. Sometimes you have to pinch yourself, and it's really happening. This is the world we're living in now. Great discussion, and we'll definitely want to hear more about the Bravo MCP as well, how it evolves. So I guess see you on the next one.
Cool.
Absolutely.
All right. That's
Thank you,
good.
Jen.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.